It's about 3:30, so we can go ahead and kick things off. Oh my goodness, there are a lot of you in here. Thank you all for being here today. For those of you I have not yet met, my name is Olivia Liddell, and welcome to the session on becoming an effective mentor. I'm a cloud training specialist at Cloud Bakers in Chicago, and it is wonderful to see so many people here, honestly, who are just interested in learning more about mentoring. As you'll see as we go throughout this session, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I also think that mentoring is something that you can get a lot of value out of with only having to do a few quick tweaks. So you can also, you can find me on Twitter at OliRavi, which is like ravioli but flipped around. And fun fact for those of you who do know me, I have never had ravioli before in my life. So it is, I know. I'm working on it. And I'll be sharing out the slides from this on Twitter later, so feel free to get those there. A little bit about me. I work as a technical trainer at Cloud Bakers. We're a cloud migration company. We work with products like G Suite, Google Cloud Platform, Zoho CRM, and whenever we have customers who are switching into one of these platforms and they need some assistance with figuring out how that change is going to affect them and their end users, they call me and I train them and really help them to understand this impact for keeping people feeling confident and comfortable with change, really. Before that, I was a teacher in Chicago Public Schools. Any teachers here? Former teachers? Not a one. Okay. One. Yay. Yay for education. All right. I taught third grade and also middle school Arabic. So if anyone's ever worked with middle schoolers before, that is where most of my patience comes from. And a lot of that feeds into what I've learned about mentoring and being mentored. And another reason why I'm standing up here is that I just have a lot of experience with mentoring. I have been mentored, I have been a mentee in formal settings and informal, everything you can imagine. And so what I like to do is to be able to kind of package all this up and be able to give you the tricks of the trade so that you can understand how to do this in your own practice. Here's our objectives for this session. First, you're going to learn how to identify some strengths that you could potentially offer as a mentor. That's going to be the starting point for this. You'll also learn how you can begin building some of these mentoring relationships at work, whether that's informal, formal, or some kind of hybrid that's in between. You'll learn how to improve your communication skills as a mentor and overcome some common fears that you might have about mentoring. One thing that I'll tell you about this training session here is that this is going to be full of very actionable strategies. So this is not going to be like, mentoring is great, everyone should do it, end of story. There's going to be very specific takeaways here so that regardless of why you chose to come into this room today, I want all of you to feel that you're walking away with something that you can start doing really right away. So with that being said, I have a question for you all. Does anyone know the origin or the etymology of the word mentor? If you had to guess, what would you think that it's from? Yes? Okay, so there's a guess like coming from like mental, like the mind. Good guess. Any other guesses? Like which language of origin do you think it comes from? Yes? Yes, it's from Greek. I did not know this as I was planning out this presentation. I just kind of fell down a rabbit hole and clicking links and stuff, and before I knew it, I was learning something. So the word mentor comes from Greek. It can actually be traced back to the Odyssey, which is Homer's epic Greek poem. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, here's like Olivia's version of the Odyssey, which is, for those of y'all who heard the conversation, me standing up here before talking about potato wedges in the beginning, like, you know what you're in for right now. So, with the Odyssey, you have this guy, Odysseus, who is the king of Ithaca, and he was about to go off in this really long battle and fight some Trojans, and he's ready to do this, right? But then he realizes before he leaves that he's got this kid at home that he needs to make sure is taken care of, his son Telemachus. So before Odysseus heads out, he asks a friend of his, he's like, hey, buddy, before I go off to battle, would you mind just checking in on my son a little bit for me and making sure he's okay? Maybe give him some advice and teach him some stuff while you're at it? His friend says, sure, I can do that. And the name of his friend was Mentor. That's where it comes from. So it's a very interesting story how this mentor character unfolds. I think Athena even comes into play at one point where a mentor needs to get a message to her, so he disguises himself as someone, or it's the other way around. Read it, it's very fascinating, but the takeaway here is that this concept of mentoring is related to teaching people things, like imparting some wisdom and knowledge onto them. And with all that being said, though, I don't want you to think that you have to be like the king of Ithaca in order to become a great mentor. One of the main takeaways here is that becoming an effective mentor is something that starts with very small, actionable pieces. And to start that, I would like for all of you to go to this website, if you can, this tiny.cc/effective mentor. Because what we're going to do to start thinking about ideas of what makes someone an effective mentor, we're going to start building a word cloud. So on this website, if you can pull it up, tiny.cc/effective mentor. And take just a second to answer the question. An effective mentor is someone who does what? And as you do that, I'm going to get it pulled up over here. Sometimes this will auto-refresh, sometimes not, so I'm just going to keep hitting refresh a few times.
Is it .org or .com?
What's that?
.org or .com?
Oh, tiny.cc/effective mentor, this one right here. And the reason I'm asking you to think about this is reflect on someone that you know who has been a mentor to you. Like, what was it that made them such a great mentor? Because when you're thinking about what's going to make you a better mentor, you really want to start with very small and specific qualities. It's not to say that over time you can't start to fold in more things, but we're going to start small. So I'm going to refresh this a couple more times here, and looks like, whoa, okay, patience is a really popular one in the room here. A lot of you are saying that an effective mentor is someone who listens, someone who is encouraging, someone who's knowledgeable. This thing keeps growing. I love it. There's a lot of ideas here that I haven't even thought about myself, like someone who may be humble. That had a few votes right there. Is patient and knowledgeable. Someone who guides, is attentive. So for those of you who may have come into this session today not necessarily having specific goals in mind, I want you to start here as a really great starting point. Because the way I'm going to present this is very similar to the way that I would actually lead one of my G Suite training sessions at Cloudbakers. In the trainings that I do, I typically will cover anywhere from, say, 15 to 20, if not even more topics. And I don't want you all to run out of here feeling like I gave you so much information that you just cannot synthesize and do something with. So here's the approach that I want you to take as we move forward. Starting from whether you have your own personal goal or something that you see here, start with 2 or 3 of these things and really focus on those throughout this session here. So maybe for yourself, you're thinking, I want to be a mentor who's patient and I want to focus on being compassionate. So throughout these slides, think about how can you use these strategies to be those things, and once you become a little bit better at patience, add in something else. Sound good? I see heads nodding, that's always a good sign. All right, so let's go back over here. Also, this is my backup in case the Wi-Fi cut out, so we always have this too. Like I said, I was a teacher, you gotta be prepared. But this will be included in the slides that I share out so that if for any reason our word cloud gets erased, this will live forever. Okay. So here's the first strategy. As you are developing your skills as a potential mentor, you want to start by identifying some skills and strengths that are specific. And here is the reason why. I'll tell you what you do not want to do as you're becoming a mentor is to say, I'm good at stuff, so I'm just going to mentor people on stuff, or I'm good at technology. That's a good start, but you really want to dig in deep and be as specific as possible. Because when someone is considering you to be their mentor, they really want to know what is unique and special about you that you can offer to them. And the good news about this is that when you look at pop culture and all of these different TV shows that we have, the concept of mentoring is actually in a lot more places than you might realize, such as Shark Tank. Who watches Shark Tank? Anyone? I love this show. I watch it way too much, but it's a really good example of what mentoring looks like because for those of you who may not have seen this show before, you have these 6 and sometimes 7 business people who are potential investors. You have regular people who go onto the show with some kind of idea in mind, and they have a business that they may have started in their community, but now they're ready to take it to the next level to get some investments from one or more of these sharks. Now, the thing about Shark Tank, when you watch it on TV, like if you just happen to see a marathon of it and catch it in passing, with this being a reality show, the producers know that the big draw in is to see which, if any, of these sharks will choose to give up some money for an investment. And then they sign the deal, and then they move on to the next one. That is part of the show, but actually the part of Shark Tank that really connects over to mentoring is what you don't see on the show itself. When someone goes onto Shark Tank as a potential person who's getting their business invested in, they are signing up for not just the money and the cash flow, but a long-term mentoring relationship with one or more of these people here. And so because of that, when they are standing in front of the sharks to pitch their business idea, they have to consider which, if any, of these sharks is going to be the best fit for them. And that gets really interesting when you have more than one shark who's interested in being someone's mentor. Because then it's not just about what they can offer in terms of money, it's more about what can they offer in terms of their personal, professional expertise. So for those of you who have seen it, I'll give you a very easy example of this. Suppose someone went on Shark Tank and they had a business product that related to something with sports. Who would be the best shark for them? Mark Cuban, the guy on the lower left. So Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, he has a lot of expertise with sports. If someone has a product that relates to sports, they're a really good fit. And it seems really obvious, but it's because on the show, Mark Cuban has made it very clear that his specific skill and strength, in many regards, is related to the sports industry. Just the other day, I was actually watching an episode that got very fascinating when it comes down to like specific skills and strengths. There were these 2 women who came onto the show, and they were pitching a product that was like vegan honey that was made from apples instead of honeybees. And they had already gotten it off the ground and running themselves, and they were ready to get some investors in it. Now, on the one hand, you had one shark, Damon, who's in the top left corner. He was saying, oh, yeah, I know about the vegan community, so I'll give you some money. And me being aware of the vegan community is the reason why you should choose me to be your mentor. On the other hand, there were 3 sharks who teamed up together to try to go in for like a joint deal, and their angle was, no, you should choose us because we can help you with the marketing, we can help you with the communication expertise. And it got really interesting because they had already proven that they were good with the business, the communications, and the marketing. But on the other side, Damon's like, but I know about the vegan community, pick me. If you know his history, on the show he tends to be more of like a fashion guy. So he wasn't making as strong of a case. It would have been different if his reputation, if his personal brand on the show had been more of, yes, this is something that is unique to me. This is something that I can mentor you on. And it turns out, I think the women chose the other 3 sharks together because of that. So what I'm saying with this story is, when you are starting to think about what you want another mentee to see in you, you've got to be really clear yourself and not just kind of pick things up to say, oh, I did this once, I can do that. Like, I had a salad once, so I know about vegans. Like, no. So, and also you can see it in other shows like The Voice, like country singers, and they go on and they choose Blake Shelton over the guy with the hair. What's his name? Adam Levine, there we go. But Blake Shelton has hair too. All right. So, if you're looking at this and feeling kind of like, okay, Olivia, that makes sense. Be specific about what your skills and strengths are, but if you have no idea where to begin, one thing that I recommend is what's called the reflective best self exercise. This is where you can you can bring in some of your trusted colleagues and friends to give you feedback about what they see in you. Because oftentimes, they'll share things about you that you weren't aware of yourself. The way it works is that you start by selecting 3 to 5 respondents and asking them for feedback. Ideally, you want these people to be some who have known you at very different parts of your career so that they can give insight into what they've pulled from those different parts. And ask them to fill out the sentence, I am at my best when ... And that's their way of essentially writing you a letter of recommendation about yourself to you. After you've compiled those responses, identify the patterns that are there, and then start composing your self-portrait. Not like drawing, but just identifying who you are. I mentioned this in another talk that I've given about overcoming a fear of failure, and one thing that I like to share about this very candidly is when I did this myself, the answer that I got, the pattern, my friends were telling me, oh, you're really good at public speaking, you should do that. I'm like, no, I don't know. I need new friends is what I need. But I then realized that if not just one person was saying that, if it was a pattern, they probably were onto something. And here I am now, so they were right. But had I not asked them about that, I probably would not have seen that in myself. Question?
So when you pick the respondents, your friends, should you pick your coworkers or your friends in general? Because you might get some sample bias based on the group that you asked.
Yeah, really good question. For those of y'all who didn't hear, the question was, when you're picking these people, should you choose just your friends or coworkers, or how do you handle some kind of sample bias? I would say initially, especially if you're feeling any kind of anxiety about doing this, even though there is the likelihood of some kind of sample bias, my recommendation would be pick people that you trust enough to follow through and actually do it. Because what I wouldn't want any of you to do is say, I'm ready to get started with mentoring, I'm taking this really big step, getting outside my comfort zone, and not just saying I'm doing it myself, but I'm asking other people to help me, and then you choose people who let you down, because then that can bring you down overall. So, does that make sense? Yeah. And then once you can always go back and reevaluate it too. Another way that you can do this is to ask yourself some questions as your own reflection. Like in your career, when were some times that you made a mistake but you learned from it? Because sometimes the strengths that you have actually started as things that did not go well at first, but you learned something from it that you can then, over time, give as knowledge to your mentee. I also put these second and third questions on here, almost like a pair. What's something that you might have struggled with at the beginning of your career that you no longer struggle with? And if you could go back to the very beginning of your career, is there something that you might consider doing differently? Even though you may be in a much better place right now, it's very worthwhile to go back to the way that things were initially when they were not so good for you. Because when you're mentoring someone, that may be the place that they're in now. And they want to be able to learn from you. To understand, not just when things are good, but how did you react to situations when they were not going well? Specifically, what did you do? Don't just say, oh, it got better over time, but no, say, at this moment, I felt this. I struggled with that. Here are the steps that I took to pull myself out of it. And just to give you a quick example of this for myself, one thing that I struggled with at the beginning of my own career, even going back to high school, if you want to consider that early Olivia career, this concept of fear of failure that I had. I was very much afraid of trying for things. Even awards, scholarships, opportunities that I was more than qualified for, I would not do them. Because I was afraid that if I didn't get them, that meant that I was a failure. And sure enough, I missed out on a lot of things that I probably could have done and gone on a different course. But what I did and what I've rolled into the mentoring that I do now is that I was able to take that experience that was mine and turn it into like a conference talk, turn it into a way that I mentor other people. And one thing that actually came out of this, I was not expecting. This morning, when I was exiting out of the first session, I ran into someone who happened to attend that conference talk that I gave last year, and he told me that it resonated with him so much that he's made improvements to his own confidence, and he applied to be a speaker at CodeMash, and he's giving his first conference talk tomorrow. And that, if I start crying, that's what's up with that. But just the idea that something that you struggle with, you can turn into a positive. So please do not run away from those things, because that can provide so much tangible value for someone else to tie into their own lived experience. So once you have identified your skill set, you then want to ask yourself if you're looking to do formal mentoring or informal mentoring, because there is a difference. Oftentimes when we think about mentoring, it comes with this idea that you're having to sit down with someone once a week and give them all the knowledge. But if you've ever been afraid to get started with mentoring because you think that it's going to require a lot of time commitment, the good news I've got for you is that there are some light mentoring options that you can do. But let's break down the general differences between formal and informal mentoring. When we're talking about informal mentoring, that's usually when mentors and mentees will self-select. Things like if you're at your company and you just happen to run into someone in the break room and you naturally strike up a conversation with them, and over time you mutually agree to have some kind of mentoring relationship, but it's not on the books, it's not with HR or even part of performance goals, that's more informal. Informal mentoring is also usually categorized by having goals not be specified. So just following the same example of meeting someone in the break room, you're agreeing in some cases to talk to each other for however long you like, just meet occasionally, but you're meeting, sharing knowledge, it's not attached to any hard written goals. It also means that outcomes usually are not tracked or measured. It's not to say that there are no good benefits that come out of informal mentoring, because there absolutely are. But I just want you to have this in mind so that as you're thinking about what's realistic for you, what's manageable for you and your company, you're not scared away by the idea that you're having to put down all these performance goals. If you are looking for more structure though, that's when you want to think about possibly doing some formal mentoring. Usually that's when mentors and mentees will be paired based on some kind of compatibility. Often in companies that incorporate formal mentoring programs, there will be one person, usually from human resources, who will have some guidelines and recommendations for how people can be paired. I've also seen it where there can be an interest survey, so matching, like potential mentors will write down what they are capable of doing, so connecting back to that skills assessment we talked about, all those things that you pulled out from there could be put in. Also with formal mentoring, this is where you do see that goals are established and tracking some kind of outcomes and measurements. Because with formal mentoring programs, there's a lot of investment that's put into these. People are putting time into it. Companies often invest money into it. And believe me when I say, they want to make sure that if they're putting time and money into a formal mentoring program, they want to be able to have the data and the metrics to understand what worked and why, and what can be repeatable for the next iteration of this mentoring program. Or on the other hand, what might not have gone so well, and why, and what may need to be modified or removed the next time it happens. Towards the end of this, I have a slide with some additional resources. So for those of you who may be interested in setting up a more of a formal mentoring program, there's an organization called SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, for any kind of HR stuff you could ever want. Even if you are not an HR person, that is the go-to organization for that. So I have a link in there that will get you into the SHRM world of stuff. Okay. So we'll start with informal mentoring. The main takeaway that I have for this type of mentoring is that you want to proactively seek out opportunities to connect. And that's because it's informal. There's nothing that is, not legally, but formally tying you to this other person. So it's really going to be up to you and them to make sure that if you are agreeing to some kind of mentoring relationship, you make it happen. Also, there may be times when you are wanting to be in an informal mentoring role but not tied to a single mentee. So kind of like a free agent of mentoring. My sports puns today are not going on, so I'm trying to think of the comparison I want to make here, but like a wandering mentor, if you will. So that you are, if you want to do that, that's great. You just have to make sure that you are proactively seeking out ways to make that happen. So here's how you do it. The first would be to offer support when you can, but do not force it. And I really mean don't force it. Make yourself available and be approachable though, especially when it comes to interns and the more junior members of your team. Before I elaborate on that, one thing I really always want to mention about this, when we say junior members of your team, please keep in mind that someone can be on your team in a junior capacity, but senior to you when it comes to age. Just because someone is older than you doesn't mean that they're not a junior. And I think that when it comes to mentoring, if you do find that there are some members of your team who are junior developers, junior programmers, junior analysts, if they're career switchers, please do consider them as potential candidates for someone that you might want to reach out to. And it can often be more difficult for them to want to reach out for help because it's this sort of assumption that, oh, you're older, you have more career experience. Yes, maybe they do in some regards, but when someone starts something new, they still need a lot of that guidance and support as well. So when it comes to being open and approachable, a good example I can give for this is last year when I started working at Cloud Bakers, I didn't realize that on the same day that I started, we also had 3 interns who were starting too. And we would be scheduled for all the same onboarding workshops and meetings together. So we would go to the HR meeting together. We would go to the sales team presentation together. And at the end of each session where one of our coworkers would present just a little blurb about what their department does and how it fits into the bigger picture, I would always end the session by thanking that person for their time. Say, oh, thank you so much, really appreciate it. And the 3 interns would just say nothing. For context, they were all in college. For some of them, this was their first ever job. But then I remembered, oh my goodness, when it comes to like offering support and being open and approachable, remember, even if you are not actively like setting foot into saying that you're in a mentoring role, interns and junior members of your team will be watching and looking at what you do, for better or worse. So that whole thing I mentioned about saying thank you at the end, after the 3rd session that this happened in, where I'm the only one saying thank you, the 4th one of the other interns said thank you. I was like, what? He said it? Oh my goodness. I didn't make him do it, he just did it. I'm like, I can turn this into an experiment. I didn't, but it got really interesting. But I kind of did make an experiment because after that, I just sat back. And the other ones, we had like 10 in the first week. Like, my company is small, but we have a lot of departments that wanted to make us feel welcome. So after that, the others would say thank you, and the teacher in me just never goes away. So to close the loop on that, I felt that it was important to reinforce their positive behavior that they were doing. So I went up to them just individually to say, oh yeah, I noticed that you thanked him after that. That's always a really great thing to do. Didn't make a big deal out of it, didn't say, I'm giving you a gold star. Just kind of, because that's weird. But, you know, I don't want to do that. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you set the example. People are watching what you do, and then you're being open. Another intern asked me after a few sessions, he's like, hey, I see that you're one of the trainers here at Cloud Bakers. Sometimes I don't know everything about G Suite, so can I come ask you questions if I need help? I said, sure. Now here's the thing about that. If you offer to help someone at some point, mean it and follow through on it, because that's your reputation right there. You do not want to get the reputation of being the person who offers to help, but when it comes time to someone needing that help, you're nowhere to be found, you're making excuses, and you let them down. So I didn't force it on him. I didn't like creep over to his desk and say, do you need help? Do you need help? Just don't do that. Give them space. This connects to the last bullet here, like let that relationship be driven by the mentee, because when he eventually did need support, he came to me and asked like, hey Olivia, there's this thing I need to figure out how to do with the pivot table in Google Sheets. Can you help me? And I love spreadsheets, so I was very excited about that, but it was great that he actually followed through and did what he said he would, and give people space, but be approachable. And this is all informal, this is not written down. But the last one I'd like to bring up as an example to how to get informal mentoring off the ground is to host an internal speed networking event. Have any of y'all ever done speed networking before? Nobody? Oh, it's fun. It's like speed dating, but with HR and snacks and stuff. And the way it works is that it's usually really best to do if you work at an organization that is a little bit on the larger side and has people who may be siloed in different departments. You know, have any of you ever been in a situation where there's that one person you always see in the kitchen at the same time of day and you're like, I don't know who they are or what they do, but I talk with them about their oatmeal every morning? So if you've ever been in that kind of situation, speed networking can really help because, like speed dating, you have one person you have people on one side of the table and then people on the other side and you rotate, and then there are sentence starters that you can use to have conversations, like quick 3-minute conversations. Introduce yourself. What department do you work in? What's a project that you're currently working on? What's your professional background? What's something unique about yourself? It seems a little cheesy at first, but I can truly attest to this because when I participated in speed networking at one of my previous jobs, I happened to sit across from someone who was at the director level that I normally would not have had any reason to speak with. And because we hit it off, because we stayed in contact after that, when a promotion opened up in her department, guess who she reached out to for that? And she would not have known about my existence had it not been for speed networking. And there were snacks, so that was really good too. So informal speed networking, I can't say enough great things about it. On the other side, if you're looking to do more formal networking, my recommendation there is to start with the end goals in mind. I know when you think about mentoring, I know when I thought about mentoring initially, I'm imagining me sitting down with some young person or some person who's just switching to a new career and I want to give them all of my knowledge and just start talking to them. But that's not really how it should happen. Rather, you want to start with your end goals in mind first before you start giving your knowledge out to really understand how you want your mentoring program to be structured. And this connects back to my background as a teacher. One of the things that we learn in teacher training is the principle of backward design, which you can see sketched out here. It's a concept by Wiggins and McTighe. They have the idea that instead of you being the teacher who just sits down and writes lesson plans to say, there's this really cool tool I want my students to use, and I'm going to plan some activity around that. No, that's bad teaching. What you do instead is identify your desired results first. I even use this all the time now in my trainings. That's even how I planned this presentation. Before I started thinking, what do I want to put on slide 1 and what kind of great graphics, it's along the lines of saying, by the end of this session, or by the end of this mentoring program, the participants will be able to do X, Y, Z. You've got to start there, because if you don't start there, you're going to be completely lost as you're actually going through this program. So you start with your desired results, work backwards from there, and determine what the acceptable evidence of that will look like. This is where you want to get some data and metrics involved with your mentoring program. So if you say, for example, our desired result is that we want all of our engineers to have some level of improvement in their technical skill. That's a great goal to have. How are you going to prove it? That's where metrics come into play. And only after you've had these initial discussion points will you then want to begin planning what the learning experience is, or in this case, what the mentoring experiences will look like in relation to parts 1 for your results and part 2 as your evidence. Before I move on, I'll say this slide is probably the one that you, I guarantee, will wrestle the most with if you really sit down and try to make a formal mentoring program. Because even myself, as an educator, as a trainer, as a public speaker, I always want to dive in head first and just start doing the thing that I'm going to do. But I guarantee, if you take the time to start with the end goals in mind, it makes it so that as you start to develop this program, as these ideas come in, you can more easily know which ones to keep and which ones to take away based on whether or not they align to your set objectives. With formal mentoring, some of the ways that you can start will be with defining that purpose and timeline, and a few categories that you may want to consider are technical mentoring, which is like the example I mentioned of skill-based development. You could also have career mentoring for people who are looking to have a more broad range of growth in their time at the organization, and leadership mentoring for someone who's looking to move specifically into a management role. That can be a really good type of formal mentoring program, and especially for leadership, You want to make sure that you are pairing people together with the necessary level of experience so that you are not putting someone in a management mentoring role if they have never been a manager, you know? So that's the kind of thing you want to assess. You also need to determine exactly how the effectiveness of this program will be measured, and this gets into the metrics and assessments that I mentioned. So a competency assessment is a good starting point. You can do before and after skills tests as a way to see how much growth was there, if any. You can also look at retention rates if you're looking to do this as a bigger part of human resources work. For example, if your company is having some really bad retention issues and you're wanting to implement a mentoring program as a way to begin retaining employees. So you could do it before and after to see, in this year, our overall or department-based employee retention rate was X. Next year, after this, we saw that maybe the mentoring program helped to keep some employees in the department. And also improve job performance rates. This could be a good one to use if there are any employees that you are putting into a mentoring program specifically because they may have a certain area or opportunity of growth on the performance plan. And that's a great reason to do it. You just want to make sure you have the data lens to be able to evaluate that. I also recommend that for formal mentoring, you set some regular check-in intervals. And that can differ depending on the duration of the program. In the example that I mentioned with the interns that we had at Cloud Bakers last year, they were there for the summer for about 3 months. So for a 3-month program, I would say probably you don't want to say meet once a month because then you meet 3 times and then they're gone and that's it. So for something shorter, maybe once a week can work and give the mentors and mentees some flexibility if they want to meet a little bit more frequently or less frequently. If you're doing this over a longer duration, like a 6-month mentoring program, that could be something where checking in once a month could be good because you don't want people to feel like all I'm doing is mentoring and this is just, I'm tired of it. Lastly, reiterating on this too, let that relationship be driven by the mentee. That is so imperative because it's going to be up to them to make sure that they are getting the most out of this. One example I can give for this is that at a previous job, I was involved in a mentoring program. It was where they pair you up with someone from leadership, and you talk about the specific project that you're working on. And we met in person. It was great, and we were getting ready to schedule the first formal meeting. As we were departing, she said to me, "Oh, okay, Olivia, set up some time on my calendar, and I'll be on the lookout for that invitation from you." I freaked out. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, wait, but are you going to send the meeting request to me?" For context, I was still at a time when I was used to meeting requests only coming to me. I never was the one to send meeting requests to anyone else, much less someone at a director level. And she looked at me and said, "Yeah, you can do it, bye." And she was tough. I loved her. There's so much from her, like even honestly just the presence that I have standing here today, that was how she carried herself when she walked into a room. And I feel like she's here with me now. So it's like an example of how I carried that over. But once I stopped freaking out about the email thing and the calendar invitation, I sat down, figured out what I had to do, and the next time I had to send her an invitation or anyone else, I'm like, oh, I did that. Had she caved in and been the one to do everything for me, I wouldn't have had that as a learning experience. So when possible, give more growing space to your mentee to have them be the one to initiate that for you. So we've talked about informal mentoring, we've talked about formal mentoring, and here is our checklist so far so that we can understand how far we've come. We have talked about the need to identify some specific skills and strengths so we know what we're able to offer to people. We have decided on a formal or informal mentoring approach, and you can do a hybrid if you want. So now what do you do? Now is when you start to improve your communication. And I could talk about communication all day. I really could. So I'm not going to pretend that what I have in these slides is the full body of effective communication. But if I had to really break it down and give you one key sticking point that sums all of this up, it would be to listen before you speak, which I know is really hard when it comes to mentoring, especially if you have this idea in your mind that mentoring is you speaking to someone else and telling them stuff. With mentoring, you really have to listen to the other person before you identify what it is that you can give them of value. And there are a few different communication phases that we're going to talk about in this next section, starting with active listening, connecting to paraphrasing, clarifying, and giving feedback at the end. The way that I'd like you to think about these slides coming up in these communication phases is not just how they work within themselves, but how they all connect into the ultimate goal of giving feedback. So for example, when we talk about active listening, I encourage you to think, what role does active listening play in giving feedback? How does paraphrasing help me to give feedback? How does the process of clarifying and asking other questions help me to give feedback? So we'll start with active listening, which looks like this, right? That's how you actively listen? Kind of stare at the other person for a little bit? No? So don't do that. That's not good to do. But here's what you can do. First, be mindful of your body language. Even when you are in a situation where you're sitting down across from the person, and you may be in an office or in a desk area setting, it's not necessarily like you have a whole lot of body language that you need to work with, but there are a few slight cues that can make a world of difference when it comes to it. So we're going to play a little game right now. Okay, it's called, I didn't give it a name, so I'm just going to give it a name right now. It's called, what do you think of the body language that I'm showing to you? With this, yeah.
It's a good name.
So, good name? Thank you. That's encouraging. All right, so the first example. What would you think if I were standing up here, giving this presentation like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm what?
Closed off.
Yeah, I thought I heard someone say pissed off too. No. That's
You
it,
don't
right?
care.
Like I may be closed off. What'd you say?
Like you don't care.
Like I don't care. Like I'm up here, it's like, whatever. Okay. How about if I were to stand like this? What does that give off? Kind of bored. Yeah. Maybe like my leg is hurt or something. Okay, or how about this one? This is kind of obvious, but if I were to give a presentation like this. Yeah, like I'm here, but I'm just not looking at y'all. So I know it was a little silly, but the point stands here. With mentoring and when it comes to active listening, you need to be very mindful of your body language because there may be subtle, slight things you're doing that are conveying a certain message that you may not be aware of. What I recommend for positive body language, have good posture and make that eye contact, but like I said, balance is everything, so don't stare at the person. But do make sure that you are giving off language that is reflective of you being open and encouraging. So you may wonder, how can you be open and encouraging when we're still in the listening phase? And that's when it comes to things like the very subtle nonverbal cues. Many of you are doing this right now. You're looking at me and smiling. You're nodding. I have some friends sitting in the front row, and they're doing that too. They're making me laugh. But those are the things that you can do too, like looking at the person, nodding, smiling, because when we talk about empathy, that's you putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And for a mentee, this may be the very first time they are sitting and talking with someone who is more senior to them, and they can be terrified. So do those little things to reassure them that it's okay, that you're in their corner. And be present. That means when you are sitting down and talking with your mentee and listening to them, you are there for them and no one else. You're not on your phone. You're not checking your email. I know it's hard. I do it all the time where I have to pull myself away from it, but it's one of those things you just have to do because you don't want that mentee to get the understanding from you that their time is not valuable to you. So just think about this as you are really considering your body language. So we're doing active listening, and after this comes paraphrasing, which looks like this, right? So what had happened was there are these aliens. Yeah. No. Paraphrasing is simply restating your thoughts from a different angle. And if you struggle with this is the teacher in me talking, but I encourage you to use sentence starters. I do this all the time when I'm in a situation where I'm feeling a little uncomfortable and I need a little bit of what we call, in the education field, scaffolding. The idea is that initially I may need these sentence starters to help me understand what I want to say. And over time, as I become more confident with paraphrasing and using them, I can come up with these on my own and I don't need them. So I'm giving you permission. It is absolutely okay to have these or any other sentence starters written on a Post-it note, put it on your notepad, and when you were talking with your mentee, just don't show them. And you're like, hey, I'm taking notes. And they don't realize that you're actually using this as a way to help you. So you might do this by saying, but what I hear you saying is, or as I understand it, you're feeling, and it sounds like you're saying that. Now, it's key that you're not repeating back to them what they said verbatim, because first of all, that's kind of creepy. And then second of all, with paraphrasing, you are showing that not only have you heard and taken in what they've said, but you've kind of processed it as well. And that's the difference between parroting back to them and paraphrasing what you've understood. Sometimes, though, you may not understand everything that they said, and this is where you want to make sure that you clarify any unsure points before you move forward. You can use these kind of sentence starters. Like, what do you mean by this? Or can you tell me more about that? I also really emphasize the one at the end. How do you feel about something? Because please do not assume how someone may be feeling about the thing that they're sharing with you. To give you an example of this, suppose your mentee comes to you and you say, hey, what are you working on this week? And the mentee says, yeah, I'm working on this project. You might say, oh, that's really exciting. And the mentee's like, oh, I'm actually kind of terrified about that. So you never want to assume what the other person is feeling. If you can't read it from what they're saying, it is absolutely okay to ask them, how are you feeling about that? Because then there's a very big difference between someone coming to you and saying, I'm starting this new project and I can't wait to begin, versus I'm starting this new project and I am terrified that I'm going to fail and get it wrong. So that's when you want to package all this up. We've done your active listening, you have paraphrased, you have clarified, and now Oprah pops out. Now you get feedback. If only Oprah came out every time I did a mentoring session. But everyone gets feedback. And to kind of sum this up, because again, there's so much you can do with it, the three main takeaways that I would recommend would be, one, to consider your mentee's perspective. Put yourself in their shoes and really think, what might they be feeling as they're sitting in front of you as someone who is new to their role. And oftentimes, I don't know about anybody else, but for myself, I often struggle with asking other people for help. That can be really tough for me. So when I'm sitting in front of someone that I have asked for help, I'm still questioning that decision and wondering, should I really be doing this? So just keep these things in mind. And when you're giving feedback, be specific and direct. Don't say like, oh, you did stuff, go you. That's like, well, what is that? You want to give feedback that is very specific and targeted, specifically if you're doing something like reviewing someone's code. So if you're saying like, oh, make sure that you always put this opening bracket there and just leave it at that. Yeah, that's specific, but I also recommend that you explain why. Like if you explain the rationale behind that. This is one of the main things I do in my trainings when I'm teaching people new concepts or correcting a concept that they might not, talking is hard, they haven't mastered. To explain to them the what and also the why, because the why reinforces that and it gives them a point to look back on and understand the rationale behind it. And it's okay to be direct, but not so direct. Don't say like, oh, you were horrible at that. Just really give them the feedback in a way that is supportive, that is encouraging, and that really helps them to internalize that to get to a better place. Okay, so we've added on to our checklist. We're in the home stretch here. Just to recap, so far, we've identified skills and strengths. We've decided if we're doing a formal or an informal mentoring approach. And we've just decided that when we're communicating, we need to listen before we speak. But sometimes, even with all of this, there may be times when you just feel like you can't be a mentor, or it's going to be too hard, or there's some reason why you feel that you can't do it. So in this last section, what I want to do is show you a few different common reasons why this may happen and what you can do to overcome that. First, you want to make sure that you're acknowledging those fears and creating a path forward. That's the scary thing for me to do. When I'm afraid of something, I'm like, I'll put it off for so long, and it's because I don't want to actually recognize and acknowledge that this is a thing I'm feeling. But I guarantee, as soon as you acknowledge the fear that you have, it becomes so much easier to come up with a plan for how you can move forward from that. One would be that you feel you may lack some strong communication skills. How many of you have ever said something that you wish you could have taken back right away? Me too. I mean, I've said stuff up here already. It happens. But the good thing is that even if you consider yourself to be socially awkward or you don't have good communication skills, there's still a way for you to become a mentor in some capacity, such as by offering advice and support to mentees through writing. That is a really good way to scaffold yourself into it, so that if you find that speaking is difficult, writing it down in advance gives you enough time to be able to process that, revise it as many times as you need to before you send that off. And remember what we said about backwards design and thinking about the end goal in mind? Even though you're giving your feedback and your advice in writing, you're still fulfilling that eventual outcome of giving that mentee the advice they need. I also encourage you to attend meetup events that are related to not only your professional interests, but your personal ones. Because if you feel like you struggle with communication, it can be difficult for someone to tell you, "Oh, just go to a professional meetup." That's gonna be scary. And you're suddenly networking with people and you don't know what to say. So I encourage you to start with the personal interest first. I'm back in Chicago where I live. A few years ago, decided to join this meetup that's about crafting. We do knitting and crocheting and cross-stitching, and we eat pancakes and waffles. And those women there have become some of my closest friends and confidants. And even it's gone to the point where they are able to give me professional advice. They actually were the ones who recommended that I apply for the job that I have now before I even had that idea. And I've developed so many skills from being in that group that benefit me professionally, but it started as a personal interest. My wife and I have even gone to Star Trek meetups because she's a Trekkie, and we learned Klingon, and that was a good way to kind of also improve communication skills. Anyone here speak Klingon? Not even one person? I was going to say the one Klingon word I know.
I have a Klingon dictionary.
Ah, who's that? Okay, there we go. That means yes, I think. All right. She'll be so proud of me that I threw Klingon into this. Or she's going to cringe like that. The last one would be don't overthink it. Remind yourself you do have something to offer to other people, I guarantee. Another common assumption could be, how many of y'all feel that you just don't have time for mentoring? Like it's just going to be too much of a time commitment? If you find that you don't have enough time, first I encourage you to focus more on these informal mentoring opportunities. But also, if you need to, it's okay to ask questions to clarify, hey, how much of a time commitment is this? Before you can make that determination if you want to follow through or not. Because as a mentor, it is very essential that you're being honest and realistic about how much time you're able to offer. One thing that I love about the CodeMash experience is that upon acceptance as a speaker, I saw in the email, they said that they have an optional mentoring program. And I love that because it allows newer speakers to be able to get the experience of working with someone to get their talk evaluated and get ideas for how to make it better. And when I saw that that was an opportunity, I looked at my calendar, I asked some questions about how much time it would take, and I signed up to do it. And so literally right after my session ends, I'm going to run down the hallway to see my mentee give her talk. She's a brand new first-time speaker. I'm so proud of her. Seriously, like I said, I may start crying. That's going to happen. But what I liked about this was it was something that we were able to do. Like we sent a few emails back and forth a few months ago. We then did a phone call, and then last week or the week before, we did a video chat to run through her full presentation. I gave her feedback, we talked about it, and now she's ready to go. That counts as mentoring. Altogether, that was like, 3 hours? But the thing is, I had to make sure that that was something I could do, because when you sign up to mentor someone, the last thing I wanted was for her to walk away from this experience feeling like she put herself out there, she became vulnerable, and I didn't follow through on what I said I was going to do. So if you see me looking like a cheerleader, like a proud mother, cheering her on, that's what's going on there. And the last part here is that if you feel that you're too much of a beginner yourself, remember to focus more on these informal mentoring opportunities and also things that you can offer with soft skills mentoring. So maybe you're new in terms of your technical skill, but you could be really good with organization or time management. And you can seek out these opportunities to find other coworkers who may benefit from having your expertise. Now again, like I said, don't be creepy, don't be kind of awkward with it. What you don't want to do is find that coworker who's always late and say, hey, you're always late. Can I mentor you on that? Don't do that. Or do and tell me how it goes. But in that case, even though this is not a technical skill, maybe you're the person who has a really great to-do list system that you've managed and you have some specific ideas that you can offer to someone. The other side of this, though, is to make sure to continue to build your skills and then teach others what you've learned. Because yes, you're a beginner now, but I guarantee at some point you will no longer be a beginner. You're going to be the one who's teaching it to someone else. So as we're wrapping up, and again, these slides are going to be shared out on my Twitter at OliRavi. I have a few links. The SHRM one that I mentioned, the Society for Human Resource Management. Seriously, if you're ever thinking about doing any kind of HR-related stuff, SHRM is the place to go. There's also Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. Did you know, fun fact, January is National Mentoring Month. Yay, I didn't realize that, but here we are. And lastly, there are two articles I put on here. One is called Thoughts on Mentorship in Tech. That's more of like an overall look at some tech-specific best practices for mentoring. And lastly, for anyone here who's a woman, or a woman of color too, I say that myself standing here, not to go too deep into this because I know we're wrapping up, but do be aware that when you're mentoring people from underrepresented groups, there's a whole additional set of considerations that go into play with that. I didn't have time to specifically address that here, but I wanted to include that link at the bottom so that if there are any of you who could benefit from that, you've got some resources to get you started. So as we close this out, quick recap. As you're becoming an effective mentor, you start by identifying skills and strengths that are specific. If you're looking for informal mentoring, that's when you proactively seek out those opportunities to connect. On the formal side, you want to start with the end goals in mind, work your way backwards. When it comes to better communication, make sure to listen before you speak. I know it's hard, but trust me, it's going to pay off. And finally, you're going to acknowledge any mentoring fears that you have and then create a path to move forward. So looking back to where we started with all this, it's been a number of slides since we started here with this journey of mentoring. But with all this being said, I want to make sure you understand that even though I've laid out the steps for what I recommend, the process of becoming an effective mentor is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that, as with any other skill, you need to continue to work at it to build up your confidence. So, last thing I'll say, to really help you internalize this, it's not a sprint. It's a lifelong journey, or as some people might call it, an odyssey. Thank you.